I am holding a little piece of the wine world that seems as ubiquitous as the image of a wine bottle itself. But have you ever stopped to think about where this little cylinder that we use to close up a bottle comes from? Well, we here at Vero have. I'm Jacqueline for Vero, where we go around the world searching out wild and scarce wines to bring to wine lovers, businesses, and distributors alike across the US. And a part of wine, well, rather the bottle of the wine, and the wines that we import in, is actually this little stopper that keeps the liquid in the bottle, and that is a cork. So have you ever wondered, when opening a bottle of wine, what cork is made of and why it's been the closure of choice for wine bottles for hundreds of years? It's a fascinating story that is rooted in tradition, sustainability, and a deep connection to nature. And we have actually visited a cork producer virtually in the past, and we've written an article all about that experience on our blog. I will have that live recording and article linked below in the description, but if this is the first time you've heard about it, it might mean you aren't currently subscribed to the Vero newsletter on verovino.com, where we send out regular updates on content, new wines, and news for wine lovers and businesses alike. So be sure to head over to verovino.com to sign up for the newsletter and check out the Vero blog. But back to cork. So cork comes from the bark of the cork oak tree. These remarkable trees will mainly grow in the Mediterranean region, with Portugal's Alentejo region boasting the largest production area and nearly half of the world's cork oak forests. You'll also find these forests in Spain, Italy, North Africa, and Greece too. The cork oak tree features prominently in all of these landscapes. They have large, sturdy trunks, which will be important for later, so remember that. Growing these trees from acorns can be challenging, as the seedlings will require shade, protection from pests, and sometimes even irrigation, which can be difficult given the remote nature of the cork oak forests. However, once they are established, they will be grown with little to no irrigation and be fairly sustainable. Farmers must prune the trees at around 5 years and 20 years old to ensure that they maintain a straight trunk, which is desirable for harvesting good pieces of cork. The first harvest, typically that happens around 20 years old, doesn't yield the best quality cork always, but it's still a really important part of the long-term sustainable cycle of growing, farming, harvesting, and maintaining the cork forests. So the cork, as we know it, actually will come from the bark of the tree, which is harvested without killing or knocking down the tree. And this harvesting of the cork is truly a unique process where the outer bark, known as cork wood, is carefully stripped by skilled craftspeople. This delicate operation is usually performed during the warm, dry weather of late spring and early summer, sometimes in June, and typically before the autumn rains and cold winter arrives. Cork farmers, like Ricardo Cecilio in Alentejo, Portugal, specialize in this ancient craft of harvesting the cork trees. It is there in Portugal that he oversees the montado, or cork forest, where harvests will occur only about every 9 years. Ricardo, who holds a biology degree and has lived in Italy for over 30 years, returned to Portugal 2 decades ago with his family to convert agricultural land into cork forests. He now lives there with his extended family, with his 6 siblings, each managing a grove of cork oaks that are harvested in rotation. For Ricardo, cork farming is a love story, driven by his passion for the forests, the animals, and his local ecosystem. Despite the remote location and the long wait for the cork yields, he embraces this continuous learning and the beauty of the montado, a landscape that demands patience and long-term planning. Long-term planning because, as we mentioned, harvest will only occur about every 9 years for a specific tree and grove, depending on the conditions. During this harvest, when the bark is stripped, the tree will appear naked, revealing a shockingly bright pink inner layer called the cambium. This is where harvesters must be extremely careful to not damage this layer of cambium, as it's vital for the tree's nutrient transport. Then, a healthy tree will regenerate its protective cork layers at about 1.5 inches every 6 years. This sustainable harvesting practice can continue for 100 years or more from a single tree once it has reached this reach maturity at around 30 years old. So what does this mean for wine corks? Well, as we've said, we know that the first super young harvest at 20 years old isn't always of the best quality. The highest grade corks will come from the 3rd to 6th harvests of the trees that are between 50 to 80 years old. This older bark is preferred because it's the least porous and the most uniform in quality. To give you an idea of scale, that's about 1 ton of cork that can be harvested from every 17 acres of cork forest, or roughly 200 pounds of cork per acre in a well-managed forest on good soil. So why do we like to use these corks to seal up our wine bottles? Well, like the farming and the harvest of cork, it is also rooted in tradition to use that cork to close up wine bottles. Natural corks have been the go-to closure for wine for centuries, and for a good reason. They are considered some of the best closures for promoting the evolution and aging of wine. This is because the natural cork has tiny pores that allow a minuscule amount of oxygen to pass into the bottle. This controlled oxygen exposure helps the wine develop more complex aromas and flavors, and potentially more body and intensity over time. In side-by-side tests, wines that are sealed with natural cork will often display the most classic examples of aging and evolution compared to other closure types. However, it's also important to acknowledge that natural corks do come with their own set of challenges. One significant drawback is their inherent variability. No two natural corks are identical, even within the same batch. This inconsistency in things like porosity can lead to slight variations between bottles and the same vintage and wine, impacting how each bottle will evolve. But that's also part of the beauty of the vintage variations, right? Another fault is called cork taint, and it comes from an infection of TCA, or trichloroanisole. But with a good quality cork and careful harvesting and farming, the risk of this TCA is greatly reduced. All right, have I got you thirsty to be tasting some wines closed with cork? Then you can head over to the Vero shop on verovino.com to check out our selection of farm-to-glass small production wines, a lot of which are cork sealed. Look especially for wineries under the natural wine categories that will be more likely to use natural corks. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like below and be sure to subscribe here on YouTube and to the Vero newsletter on verovino.com to not miss any more great wine-related content. I will see you with the next video, which might be this one here. Bye!